The news broke before dawn. Missiles glinted under the Philippine sun as a new era began in the South China Sea. Manila had deployed BrahMos supersonic missiles at sea, sending a message that rippled across Asia. This was no ordinary military exercise. It was a turning point. A bold declaration of sovereign intent. Within hours, headlines screamed across international media. Philippines deploys BrahMos missiles. South China Sea, standoff escalates. Video footage showed sleek launchers rolling onto remote coastal outposts. The world watched as a nation long seen as the underdog stood tall, determined to defend its waters. The move stunned observers and unsettled old assumptions. For years, the Philippines had relied on diplomacy and legal appeals. Now, with BrahMos missiles poised over contested seas, Manila signaled that the days of passive resistance were over. The game had changed. Suddenly the stakes were higher than ever. For millions in the Philippines and beyond, this was more than a military maneuver. It was a moment of reckoning as Asia's oldest democracy stood up for its rights, ready to face the risks that come with taking a stand. Beijing's reaction was swift and unmistakably tense. Chinese state media interrupted regular programming, showing stern-faced anchors reading out official statements. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the deployment a provocative act, warning of serious consequences. Social media platforms in China buzzed with nationalistic outrage and demands for a firm response. At the highest levels, the shock was palpable. For years, China had built up military bases and artificial islands across the South China Sea, projecting power with little challenge. The appearance of BrahMos missiles, capable of striking ships and bases at supersonic speeds, upended those calculations. Military analysts on state television debated next steps. Some urged restraint, warning that a strong reaction could backfire. Others called for naval drills and patrols near Philippine waters. Across the border, the mood turned wary. Even as diplomats called for calm, naval commanders were put on alert. China's surprise was rooted in its assumption that the Philippines would not risk escalation. Now Beijing faced a new reality. Manila was willing to take unprecedented risks to defend its claims. The old playbook no longer applied. In Manila, the atmosphere was electric. News of the missile deployment spread quickly, sparking waves of pride and anxiety. For some, this was a moment of national vindication, a show of strength after years of frustration. Social media filled with images of the BrahMos in action, decorated with emojis and patriotic hashtags. Yet, beneath the celebration, there was nervousness. Some citizens worried about escalation. "I'm proud, but also scared," said one university student on a morning news show. What if China retaliates? Others voiced support for the government's bold stance, arguing that the Philippines must not be bullied in its own backyard. The government sought to reassure the public. Defense officials explained that the deployment was defensive, aimed at protecting fishermen, coastlines, and national assets. Political leaders called for unity, urging Filipinos to stand firm but remain calm. Across the archipelago, families, fishermen, and business owners all wondered what would come next. For many, this was a moment of reckoning, proof that the Philippines was ready to defend itself no matter the odds. The South China Sea is not just blue water on a map. For Filipinos, it is life itself, a source of food, income, and pride. Hundreds of thousands of families rely on these waters for fishing, their main source of protein and livelihood. Each day, small wooden boats set out at dawn, returning with catches that feed coastal towns. But the sea is more than just a fishing ground. Beneath its waves lie valuable oil and gas reserves. These resources could help power the nation and reduce dependence on foreign energy. Shipping lanes through the South China Sea carry billions of dollars in trade. Everything from electronics to food passes through these waters, keeping the Philippine economy alive. Yet for years, Filipino fishermen have faced harassment and danger from Chinese vessels. Coast Guard ships and maritime militia have blocked access, seized catches, and even rammed boats. The sense of injustice runs deep. Every Filipino knows someone touched by these struggles. For Manila, defending the South China Sea is about survival and sovereignty. It is about ensuring that future generations can fish, trade, and thrive in their own waters, free from fear or foreign control. The struggle over the South China Sea is not new. For decades, the Philippines and China have clashed over reefs, islands, and fishing grounds. Tensions spiked in the 2010s when China built military outposts on disputed features, turning reefs into fortress-like islands. Manila fought back with diplomacy. In 2013, the Philippines brought a landmark case to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. 3 years later, the court ruled in Manila's favor, rejecting China's sweeping claims based on the so-called 9-dash line. But China ignored the verdict. Confrontations at sea continued, with Filipino fishermen facing growing risks. Talks and negotiations went on for years, but little changed. Each round of dialogue ended with promises, but no real progress. Meanwhile, China's Coast Guard and Navy grew ever more assertive. Pressure built at home for the Philippines to do more than just talk. By 2026, patience had run thin. The deployment of BrahMos missiles was the result of years of frustration, a statement that the Philippines would no longer be pushed aside. The BrahMos missile is not just another weapon. Developed by India and Russia, it is the world's fastest supersonic cruise missile. It can fly at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, skimming just above the waves before striking targets with pinpoint precision. For years, the Philippines looked for ways to modernize its defenses. The BrahMos was the answer: fast, hard to intercept, and powerful enough to deter even the largest warships. Its range and versatility allow it to strike both sea and land targets. With each missile, the balance of power in the region shifts. For Manila, acquiring the BrahMos was a strategic leap. It showed the world that the Philippines was no longer defenseless. The missile's presence alone sends a message: any attack on Philippine waters will be costly. This game-changing weapon is more than metal and fuel. It is a symbol of hope, resilience, and the will to defend national dignity. The BrahMos missiles were not deployed at random. Military leaders chose key sites along the country's western frontier, outposts facing the South China Sea. Some launchers are based on Palawan, the Long Island closest to the contested Spratly Islands. Others are positioned on remote islets, hidden from prying eyes but ready to strike if needed. These locations are crucial. Palawan is the gatekeeper to the West Philippine Sea. From here, missiles can cover vast stretches of disputed waters, protecting both Filipino fishermen and vital shipping lanes. Remote outposts increase the challenge for any attacker, dispersing defenses and complicating enemy plans. Local communities have watched the deployment with a mixture of pride and concern. Some welcome the protection. Others worry about becoming targets, but military planners insist these positions are chosen to maximize defense, minimize risk, and send a clear signal to any would-be aggressor. In these far-flung corners of the archipelago, the fate of a nation may one day be decided. Military officials in Manila hailed the deployment as a historic milestone. Generals spoke of a new era of deterrence, where the Philippines could finally stand up to bigger powers. Defense analysts agreed, calling the BrahMos a force multiplier that levels the playing field. On the ground, reactions were more mixed. Fishermen expressed hope that they could return to traditional grounds without fear. Community leaders in Palawan organized prayer vigils, asking for peace and safety. Some worried that their towns might become targets if tensions rose further. Other Southeast Asian countries watched with keen interest. Vietnam quietly expressed support, having its own disputes with China. Indonesia called for restraint, but recognized the Philippines' right to self-defense. In Malaysia and Brunei, analysts debated whether to follow Manila's example. Throughout the region, the message was clear: the South China Sea is no longer a one-sided contest. Smaller countries are finding new ways to rebalance power and protect their interests. The deployment of BrahMos missiles changes the game, but it also raises the stakes. Experts warn that miscalculation or accident could spark a wider conflict. Deterrence works best when both sides understand the risks, said one retired admiral. Yet for many Filipinos, the alternative, continued harassment and loss of rights, was no longer acceptable. Supporters argue that strong defenses are the best path to peace. By deterring aggression, the Philippines can create space for real dialogue. The hope is that China will think twice before pushing further, and that negotiations can resume on equal footing. Still, the risks remain. A single mistake could escalate into crisis. Both sides must keep channels of communication open, even as they stand their ground. Regional organizations like ASEAN will play a key role in keeping tensions from boiling over. In the end, the deployment is not just about missiles. It is about a nation's right to peace, dignity, and control over its destiny.